Hello, my friends. Glad you're here. Support the channel with a like, comment, and subscription. I used to think forests were honest places. Trees don't lie, trails don't move, moss grows where it grows, and rot stays where something has died. That's what I believed when I parked my truck at the edge of Blackwood Forest and stepped into the tree line with my backpack, compass, and rifle. I was wrong about all of it. I wasn't there for adventure. I wasn't even there because I wanted to be. I took the job because it paid well and because it kept me away from people. A wildlife survey contract, 2 weeks alone, mapping animal paths and checking motion cameras deep in protected forest land. No phone signal, no internet, just trees, silence, and routine. The ranger who handed me the permit looked at me longer than necessary. "Don't leave the marked zones," he said. I smiled. "That's the point of a map." He didn't smile back. The first 3 days were perfect, quiet, predictable. I set cameras, logged tracks, cooked over a small fire, and slept to the sound of wind moving through leaves like a slow breath. I remember thinking that this forest felt old, not ancient in a mystical way, just tired, like it had seen too many people come and go. On the 4th morning, something went wrong. I woke up before sunrise to the sound of footsteps, not animals, not branches snapping randomly. These were slow, deliberate steps circling my campsite. I stayed still, hand on my rifle, listening. They stopped behind my tent. I held my breath. Nothing happened. After a long minute, the footsteps continued, walking away deeper into the trees. When I stepped outside, there were no tracks. The ground was soft with damp leaves and soil, but it was untouched. No prints, no disturbed foliage. I told myself it was paranoia. Forests play tricks on the mind. Isolation does worse. By noon, I reached camera site 7. It wasn't there. The metal pole was gone. No broken bolts, no damage. Just an empty patch of ground where it had been, surrounded by trees that leaned slightly inward, like spectators. I checked my map. The GPS coordinates matched. This was the right place. I felt a brief, irrational thought crawl into my mind. Maybe it moved. I laughed out loud at myself, the sound too sharp in the quiet. That night, I dreamed I was walking through the forest while someone followed me, perfectly matching my steps. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned around, I saw only my own back walking away. I woke up screaming. On the 5th day, the trails changed. I don't mean they felt different. I mean they were physically wrong. A fork in the path I had used twice before was gone. In its place stood a dense wall of young trees, trunks thin and pale, packed so tightly I couldn't force my arm between them. Saplings don't grow overnight. Forests don't rearrange themselves. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun once, then settled, pointing south. I walked south. After an hour, the compass pointed north. Panic is subtle at first. It doesn't scream. It whispers reasonable explanations until you realize none of them fit together. I marked trees with bright orange tape, but when I turned back, the tape was gone, or hanging from different trees entirely. That evening, I found my own footprints ahead of me on the trail. They were fresh, the exact tread of my boots pressed into mud that hadn't been there earlier. I stopped walking. The footprints stopped too. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the ground, waiting for something to step out of the trees and explain itself. Nothing did. I slept poorly, rifle across my chest. Sometime during the night, I heard my name, not shouted, not whispered, spoken normally from somewhere beyond the firelight. "Hey," the voice said, my voice, "you're going the wrong way." I didn't answer. The voice sighed, disappointed. On the 6th day, I tried to leave. I packed everything and followed the most direct route back to the ranger station. I walked for hours, longer than the hike and should have taken. My legs burned, my mouth dried. The forest didn't thin. Instead, it grew denser. The trees became taller, darker, their branches twisting together overhead until the sky disappeared. The air smelled wrong, sweet and rotten, like something decaying slowly on purpose. Then I saw the cabin. It was mine. My tent, my fire pit, my supplies, all set up exactly as I had left them. Even the half-empty water bottle sat on the same rock. I stood at the edge of the clearing, shaking. I had walked in a straight line. I was certain of it. Something behind me snapped a branch. I turned, rifle raised. A man stood between the trees. He looked exhausted. Dirt streaked his face. His beard was uneven. His eyes were bloodshot with fear and relief. He looked exactly like me. "Thank God," he said. "You found me." I didn't lower the rifle. He frowned. "What are you doing?" "You're not real," I said, though my voice didn't believe it. He laughed nervously. "Of course I'm real. I got lost. The forest keeps turning me around. You wouldn't believe—" "Stop," I said. He stopped. We stared at each other. The forest was silent, waiting. Slowly, he lowered his hands. "Listen," he said. "I don't know what this place is, but it doesn't let you leave. It copies you, watches you, learns you." My heart hammered. "Then what are you?" His eyes filled with tears. "I don't know anymore." Behind him, the trees shifted, not swaying, leaning as if listening. A sound rose from deep in the forest, not a roar, not a growl, but a low, steady hum, like countless insects vibrating inside a giant throat. The man, me, looked over his shoulder and screamed. The trees moved. They bent inward, bark splitting like skin, roots tearing free of the earth and dragging themselves forward. Shapes formed between trunks, too many limbs, joints bending the wrong way, faces half remembered and unfinished. The forest was assembling something. I ran. I don't remember how long I ran. I don't remember falling or hitting my head or losing my rifle. I remember bursting out of the tree line into sunlight and asphalt, collapsing onto a road I didn't recognize. A truck stopped. Hands pulled me up. Voices asked questions I couldn't answer. At the hospital, they said I had severe dehydration, exposure, and signs of psychological trauma. They asked where my partner was. I told them I was alone. They exchanged looks. The ranger station sent someone to retrieve my equipment. They found my campsite. They also found a second one, identical. 2 sets of gear, 2 journals, 2 names written in the same handwriting. They never found the other man. Weeks later, I woke up at home to the sound of footsteps circling my bed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. From the darkness, a familiar voice spoke softly. "You left me there." Outside my window, the trees in my yard leaned closer together, listening. I did not go into the forest to explore it. I went in to forget. After my brother died, the world became loud in a way I couldn't escape. Phones buzzing, cars passing, people asking questions I didn't want to answer. I took unpaid leave from work, drove 6 hours north, and rented a small fire lookout cabin that sat on the edge of a state forest no one seemed to visit anymore. The caretaker handed me the key and a folded paper. "Rules," he said, "not regulations, just things that make life easier." I glanced at them and smiled politely. Rule 3 caught my eye. If you hear your name called from the trees, do not respond. I laughed. Is this some kind of local legend thing? The caretaker didn't laugh with me. "People hear things when they're tired," he said. "The forest carries sound strangely." That night I slept better than I had in months. The cabin was small but solid. Thick wooden walls, a narrow bed. one window that faced the tree line. The forest stood motionless beyond the glass, black and endless. The silence felt clean. On the second day, I hiked a short distance from the cabin to clear my head. The forest wasn't dense. Tall pines spaced evenly apart, needles soft underfoot. Every sound carried clearly. Birds, wind, my boots crunching. That was when I realized something strange. The forest echoed too well. When I stopped walking, the sound of my last step continued a fraction of a second longer than it should have, like the forest was repeating it after me. I told myself it was just acoustics. At noon, I sat on a fallen log and ate a sandwich. As I chewed, I heard breathing. Slow, careful, close. I stood up so fast I nearly fell. Nothing was there, no animals, no movement, just trees and sunlight. That night, I read the rules again. Rule 5 was underlined in red ink. Never say your full name out loud. I didn't remember doing that. On the third night, the forest spoke, not in words, in rhythm. A tapping sound came from outside the cabin, soft, hollow, wood on wood. Tap, tap, tap. I opened the window slightly and listened. The sound stopped. Then it started again, matching my heartbeat. I slammed the window shut and backed away. Minutes passed, then hours. I didn't sleep. The next morning I found marks on the trees near the cabin, long vertical grooves carved into the bark at chest height, not claw marks, too straight, too deliberate. Letters, not forming words, just shapes that felt almost familiar, like someone had tried to copy writing without knowing how language worked. I packed my bag. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Grief does things to people. Isolation does worse. I would drive home, see a therapist, pretend this trip never happened. As I loaded the car, a voice called from the trees. Daniel, my name, spoken clearly, not shouted, not whispered. I froze. The voice came again. Daniel, you dropped something. I felt an overwhelming urge to answer, to step into the trees and ask who was there. My throat tightened as if my body had already decided. Rule 3 burned in my mind. I didn't respond. The forest went silent. When I turned the key in the ignition, the car didn't start. The radio flickered on by itself. Static filled the cabin. Then a voice, distorted, layered, too many mouths speaking at once. Daniel Michael Reyes, my full name. I screamed and ripped the radio out of the dashboard. The forest screamed back. Every tree shuddered. Needles rained down. The tapping returned, now coming from everywhere at once. The sound of wood striking wood multiplied until it felt like the forest was clapping, applauding. I ran. I didn't take the car. I didn't take my phone. I ran down the trail toward the highway, branches tearing at my arms, my breath ripping out of me in panicked gasps. Behind me, the forest repeated my footsteps, perfectly. I burst out onto the road and collapsed. A passing driver stopped, helped me up, drove me to town. I told him I got lost. I didn't tell him the forest knew my name. I checked into a motel that night. At 3:17 a.m., someone knocked on my door. Tap, 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 the same rhythm. Daniel, a voice said gently, you left part of yourself behind. I didn't answer. The knocking continued until sunrise. When I opened the door, no one was there, but carved into the wood were familiar shapes, almost letters, spelling something I didn't want to read. Come back. Weeks passed. I tried to return to normal life, therapy, work, noise, distraction. But sometimes, when everything was quiet, I would hear it. My own breathing, followed by another breath half a second later, repeating me, learning. Last night I woke up to the sound of tapping inside my apartment, coming from the walls, from the floor, from my chest. And when I tried to scream, the sound that came out wasn't my voice. It was the forest saying my name again. They told me the forest was dead. That's why I volunteered. 2 summers ago, a lightning strike sparked a wildfire that burned through 70 square miles of mountain forest. It moved fast, too fast for anything living to escape. When the flames finally died, all that remained was ash, blackened trunks, and a silence so complete it felt artificial. The research team needed someone to monitor regrowth patterns, soil samples, fungal spread, insect return, long-term exposure work, weeks alone in a burn scar where nothing was supposed to survive. I had already lost my job. My marriage had ended quietly, like something unplugged. I needed to be somewhere empty. So I drove up the mountain and set my camp in the middle of what they called the dead zone. On the first day, the forest proved them wrong. Tiny green shoots pushed through ash like broken teeth. Beetles crawled beneath fallen bark. Life was returning, slow and stubborn. I documented everything carefully, proud to be the first witness to rebirth. That pride didn't last. On the second night, I smelled smoke. I jolted awake, heart racing, sure the fire had returned, but the air was cold, damp, and still. No flames, no glow, just the smell, thick, bitter, and wrong. The ground beneath my tent was warm, not hot, warm, like a body cooling. I told myself it was geothermal activity. The mountain had hot pockets. That happened. I moved my tent anyway. On the third day, I found the hole. It wasn't on the map. A perfect circle in the forest floor, about 6 feet wide, lined with smooth black stone that hadn't been burned, hadn't been touched at all. Ash stopped cleanly at its edge, as if the fire had gone around it deliberately. I leaned over and shined my flashlight inside. The light didn't reach the bottom. I dropped a rock. It never landed. I marked the location and reported it via satellite phone. They told me to leave it alone until a geology team could arrive. I should have listened. That night, the forest made noise for the first time since I arrived. Not wind, not animals, crackling, like embers shifting beneath ash. The sound came from everywhere at once. I lay awake, listening, as the blackened trees around my camp released faint orange light from within their cracks, like veins glowing under charred skin. Bioluminescence, I thought. Fungal bloom. Rare, but documented. Still, my hands shook as I wrote it down. On the fourth day, I realized time was slipping. My watch said 8:30 a.m., but the sun was directly overhead. I recalibrated it. By noon, it was wrong again. My phone battery drained even while powered off. The shadows didn't move the way they should, and the hole was bigger. Not by much, but enough that I noticed. Something had pushed the stone lining outward from below. That afternoon, I found tracks. Bare human footprints in the ash. They led from the hole to the remains of a fallen tree and stopped. No return prints, just one set, waiting. That night, I heard voices from inside the ground, muffled, layered, not screaming, talking, arguing. I pressed my ear to the soil and felt vibration, like distant machinery or a massive breath moving far below. Words surfaced occasionally, not clear sentences, fragments. Too early, still burning. Don't let it breathe. I backed away, heart pounding. I tried calling base. The satellite phone connected, but all I heard on the other end was crackling. Then the same voices, distorted, speaking over each other. My voice echoed back at me half a second late. I shut it off. On the fifth morning, the forest was no longer burned. Green stretched in every direction. Tall trees stood where charred stumps had been the night before. Leaves rustled overhead. Birds sang. But the air still smelled like smoke. The hole was gone. In its place stood a mound of fresh soil, covered in mushrooms, thick pale caps pulsing slowly like lungs. I didn't document it. I ran. The trail I'd used every day twisted in impossible ways, looping back on itself, narrowing until branches scraped my face. The forest floor felt soft, unstable, like wet flesh beneath my boots. Then I saw the tower. An old fire lookout tower, rusted but intact, rising above the canopy. It hadn't been there before. I climbed. From the top, I could see the truth. The forest wasn't regrowing, it was closing. Trees leaned inward toward a central point miles away, their growth patterns curved like ribs around a heart. Beneath the canopy, the ground shifted slowly, subtly, breathing. The fire hadn't killed it, it had opened it. The tower radio crackled a life on its own. A voice spoke, calm and tired. "You shouldn't be here." "Who is this?" I shouted. "Someone who stayed." The voice explained what the fire had uncovered, an ancient layer beneath the forest, older than stone, older than soil. Something that fed on heat, on decay, on disturbance. It didn't hunt, it grew. Every fire, every clearing, every road cut made it stronger. "We kept it asleep," the voice said, "by leaving it alone." "Why didn't you warn anyone?" I asked. A pause. "We did." The radio cut out. The tower shook. Below, the forest floor split open. Not a hole, a mouth. I climbed down too fast, skinning my hands, tearing my jacket. The trees groaned as roots pulled free, dragging trunks toward the opening. Mushrooms burst from the soil, releasing clouds of glowing spores that filled the air. Breathing burned. The forest wasn't alive the way animals are alive. It was alive the way wounds are. I reached the edge of the clearing where my camp had been. My tent was gone. In its place stood a wooden sign, freshly carved. Control burn zone. I understood then. The fires weren't accidents, they were treatments. I tried to leave the boundary. The ground resisted, sticky and elastic, pulling at my boots. Heat rose beneath my feet. The smell of smoke returned, stronger than ever. I did the only thing I could think of. I lit my last flare and threw it into the open mouth of the forest. The ground screamed, not with sound, with pressure. A wave of force knocked me backward as flames raced through roots and soil, chasing something deep below back into itself. I don't remember escaping. They found me days later, wandering the highway, burned and incoherent. The official report said the forest fire had flared up again unexpectedly, destroying my camp and most of the research area. The site was permanently closed. No one mentions the regrowth anymore, but sometimes, late at night, I feel warmth beneath the floorboards of my apartment. A slow, patient heat, waiting. Because fires don't kill everything. Some things only wake up when we try to erase them. The Forest Reserve hired me because I was patient. That's what the email said. Not brave, not skilled, patient. The job description was simple. Sit in a monitoring station deep inside a protected forest and log changes. No interaction, no interference, no exploration, just observation. They didn't want samples. They didn't want photos. They wanted handwritten notes. That should have been my first warning. The station was a small concrete structure, half buried into a hillside, with one wide observation window facing the forest. Inside, a desk, a chair, a lamp, a notebook, a clock mounted above the window, and nothing else. No bed, no bathroom. When I asked about that, the man who escorted me in said, "You won't be here long enough for it to matter." Then he left. The door locked behind him with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. The forest outside was ordinary at first glance. Tall trees, uneven ground, scattered undergrowth. No obvious trail, no animals, no wind. What stood out was how still it was. Not quiet, still. Leaves hung motionless, branches didn't sway, even shadows seemed fixed like a paused video. I checked my watch. It was working. The clock on the wall ticked once every second. I wrote my first note. Hour 1, no visible movement. By hour 3, my eyes hurt. Staring into unmoving space does strange things to your vision. Patterns emerge. Depth warps. I blinked hard and looked away, rubbing my face. When I looked back, one tree was closer. Not by much. Maybe a foot. I stood up, heart thumping, pressed my face to the glass. The ground beneath that tree showed no disturbance, no uprooted soil, no dragged roots. I sat back down. Hour 4, possible visual distortion. I decided to blink less. That sounds insane written down, but it felt necessary. Like the forest was waiting for something, and blinking was giving it permission. By hour 6, my eyes burned so badly tears streamed down my cheeks. I didn't wipe them away. I didn't blink. The tree moved again. This time I was sure, slowly, subtly. Like a clock hand you only notice when it's already advanced. It wasn't just that tree anymore. The entire tree line had shifted forward by inches. I tried the door. Locked. I banged on it until my hands hurt. No response. The clock ticked. Hour 7. I realized something worse then. The forest wasn't moving toward the station. The station was sinking backward. The concrete floor vibrated faintly, like something beneath it was adjusting, settling. I ran to the back wall, pressed my ear against it. A deep, muffled sound traveled through the structure. Breathing, not loud, not aggressive, sustained. I backed away. When I returned to the window, the forest was closer again. The trees now stood at an angle, leaning slightly forward as if peering in. I wrote with shaking hands. Hour 8, distance decreasing. Unsure of reference point. The forest floor began to change, not growing, not decaying, flattening. Roots pulled themselves down, smoothing the ground. Rocks shifted until the terrain resembled a single continuous surface, unbroken, deliberate, prepared. My reflection appeared in the glass. I hadn't noticed it before. My eyes were bloodshot, wide, unblinking. My face looked wrong, too still, like it belonged to a mannequin wearing my skin. When I moved, my reflection lagged, just slightly. I turned away from the window and faced the room. The notebook pages behind me rustled. I hadn't touched them. Slowly, I turned back. New writing filled the pages beneath my last entry. Not my handwriting. Neat, precise. Blinking causes displacement. Observation must remain continuous. I screamed. The sound didn't echo. It vanished the moment it left my mouth, swallowed by the room like it had never existed. The clock ticked. Hour 9. Something tall passed between the trees. I couldn't fully see it, only the way its movement displaced the background, like heat distortion shaped into limbs. Wherever it stepped, the forest adjusted around it, accommodating its passage. It stopped directly in front of the window. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking back. I felt pressure behind my eyes, a terrible urge to blink, to look away, to surrender even for a second. My vision tunneled. Black crept in at the edges. The notebook page flipped on its own. Do not interrupt the exchange. Exchange. What exchange? I croaked. The glass vibrated. The pressure increased. Images flooded my mind. Not memories, but records. Countless moments of observation. People sitting where I sat, watching, not blinking, being replaced. The forest wasn't approaching. It was copying. Learning how stillness worked inside human skin. My eyes finally betrayed me. I blinked. The world lurched. The window was gone. The forest stood inside the room. Trees pierced the concrete floor effortlessly, roots threading through cracks that hadn't existed before. The ceiling split as branches forced their way upward. The thing stood inches from me now. Up close, it wasn't monstrous. It was unfinished. A suggestion of form, Vertical, segmented, layered with textures stolen from bark, bone, and fabric. Its surface shifted constantly, never settling. Where its face should have been was a smooth plane, reflective like dark glass. I saw myself in it, perfectly still. The thing raised an arm, or something like one, and placed it against my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Information poured into me. Not pain, not fear, purpose. The forest didn't consume, it archived. Stillness was the key. Motion decayed data, blinking disrupted transfer. The thing stepped back. I felt something leave me, or enter me. The room reassembled itself. Concrete returned. Trees withdrew. The window reappeared. The clock ticked. Hour 10. The door unlocked. Men in uniforms entered, faces carefully blank. One of them looked at the notebook and nodded. "Successful," he said. They guided me out. I didn't resist. Outside, the forest looked normal again. Wind stirred the leaves. Birds flew overhead. I wanted to cry. I couldn't. At the exit gate, the man handed me my notebook. "Keep it," he said. "You won't need it anymore." I walked away. That was 3 months ago. Now I sit in my apartment staring at the wall. I haven't blinked in hours. Sometimes, when I let my eyes relax just enough, I see the wall lean forward, observing me back, and I finally understand. I was never hired to study the forest. I was hired to teach it how to watch. The first thing I noticed was that my ankle didn't hurt. I'd stepped wrong on the trail, felt the bone roll, felt the weight come down wrong. I heard the sound it made, that dry internal crack that usually sends people to the ground screaming. But I didn't fall. I didn't even limp. I stood there in the middle of the forest, waiting for pain that never arrived. At first, I laughed. Adrenaline, I told myself. Shock does that sometimes. I tested it by putting more weight on the ankle, twisting it deliberately. Nothing. No pain, no resistance. It held my weight easily. I should have turned back right then. I was deep in a national forest doing solo trail maintenance, clearing fallen branches, marking erosion damage, documenting invasive plant spread. The job paid well because no one wanted to do it alone. Days from the nearest ranger station. The forest had a reputation. People said injuries went unnoticed there. Hunters didn't realize they'd been shot until they saw blood. Hikers walked miles on broken feet. Stories like that. I didn't believe them. By noon, I noticed the second thing. The insects avoided me. Flies hovered near my skin, then drifted away. Mosquitoes landed, paused, and lifted off without biting. Even ants rerouted around my boots like they'd hit an invisible wall. That bothered me more than my ankle. By evening, I had a third confirmation. I cut my hand. It was a clean slice from my knife, deep enough that it should have burned, should have pulsed. Instead, it felt like pressure, nothing more. Blood welled up dark and slow, but my body didn't react. No sting, no warning. I wrapped it, uneasy now, and made camp. That night, I slept heavily. Too heavily. When I woke, my fire had burned down to nothing. My arm had gone numb from sleeping on it. The numbness didn't fade. I slapped my forearm hard. I felt the impact, but not pain, just information, like tapping on a table. Panic crawled up my spine. I pressed my fingernail into my skin until it left a white crescent. Nothing. I pinched harder. Still, nothing. I wasn't numb. Pain was gone. The radio didn't work. Static only. I decided to hike out immediately. That's when I noticed the trail had become easier. Not clearer. Easier. Branches lay out of the way. Thorns bent aside. Fallen trees positioned themselves into natural steps. The forest seemed arranged for smooth movement, like it wanted me to walk faster, farther. My ankle finally failed 5 miles in. I stepped down and the joint collapsed, folding sideways in a way joints aren't meant to go. I went down hard, still no pain. I stared at my foot, which now pointed in the wrong direction. A rational part of me screamed. Another part, the louder one, stood up. I reset the joint with my hands. I heard cartilage tear. I felt nothing. That's when I started crying. Not from pain, from the absence of it. Pain exists for a reason. It's a boundary, a warning. Without it, my body felt less like mine and more like equipment I could misuse indefinitely. I wrapped my ankle tight and kept moving. The forest thickened. Not denser, closer. Trees leaned inward. Underbrush crowded my knees. The path narrowed until I had to turn sideways to pass between trunks. And still, no pain. I scraped my shoulder on bark and felt skin peel. I slipped and slammed my knee against a rock hard enough to split it open. Blood soaked my pants. I didn't feel it. I found the first body near dusk. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, a hunting dummy abandoned in the brush. Then I saw the flies. The man lay against a tree, eyes open, face calm. His leg was twisted backward, bone protruding white and dry. He hadn't bled out. He'd bled slowly. His hands were torn to ribbons. His chest was opened, not violently but carefully, like someone had explored themselves piece by piece. His expression wasn't fear, it was confusion. Pinned to his jacket was a laminated tag. Pain response. Failure, do not remove from sight. My stomach dropped. There were more. Not all close together, but not far either. Men and women in various states of damage, missing fingers, exposed ribs, shattered skulls that somehow hadn't killed them immediately. None showed signs of struggle. They hadn't been attacked. They'd been unprotected. I realized then what the forest did. It didn't numb pain. It turned it off. And without it, people didn't know when to stop. I stumbled into a clearing and found a small concrete structure half swallowed by moss and vines. Inside were clipboards, rusted medical tools, cameras bolted into the corners. Research, old. A logbook sat on a desk. I flipped through it with shaking hands. Day 12. Subjects adapt rapidly. Increased risk-taking behavior observed within 24 hours of analgesic field effect. Day 19. Injuries escalate. Subjects unable to self-regulate. Day 31. Pain appears to be absorbed by the environment. Soil composition altered. Growth accelerated. I looked outside. The trees around the building were thick, towering, impossibly healthy. I kept reading. Day 42. Forest shows preference for prolonged exposure. Subjects who attempt extraction deteriorate rapidly once boundary is crossed. Day 43. Hypothesis: pain is not removed, it is relocated. I felt sick. The forest wasn't merciful, it was hungry. I tried to leave anyway. The boundary wasn't marked. There was no fence, no sign. But I felt it the moment I crossed it. Pain hit me like a freight train. Everything I had done, every ignored injury, every tear, break, and rupture returned at once. I screamed. My ankle exploded in agony. My knee burned. My shoulder felt flayed. My hand throbbed like it was being crushed. I collapsed, convulsing, and the forest pulled me back. Roots coiled around my legs. Not tight, not violent, gentle, guiding. The pain faded as soon as I crossed back inside. I lay there sobbing, gasping, relieved and horrified all at once. I understood then. Leaving wasn't allowed, not because the forest trapped you, because once you'd given it enough pain, you couldn't survive without its silence. Days passed. I stopped keeping track. I learned to move carefully, not because it hurt, but because damage accumulated fast. I saw what happened to those who forgot that their bodies still broke even when they didn't complain. I found supplies left behind by previous researchers: food, bandages, notes written shakily toward the end. It doesn't want us dead. Dead things stop producing. Produce. Pain. I started to feel tired in a new way. Heavy. Like something inside me was draining. I cut myself one night. Just a shallow slice. Controlled. The forest responded immediately. New growth surged around the cut. Vines crept closer. Leaves unfurled overnight. It rewarded me. That's when I realized the final truth. The forest wasn't feeding on injury. It was feeding on suffering. The signal pain sends, not the damage itself. And it had learned that humans were endless sources, as long as we couldn't feel when to stop. I don't know how long I've been here now. I write this in a notebook I found buried in a supply crate, hoping someone reads it before they feel that first painless step. My body is a patchwork of scars I don't remember earning. Sometimes, at night, I feel a distant ache deep in my bones. Not pain exactly, just pressure, like the forest digesting. I don't try to leave anymore. I'm afraid of how much pain I've given it, and more afraid of how much it might give back if I ever do. Subscribe for more true horror stories. Thanks for watching.